Hi, and welcome back to my art and fiction channel. I'm Adele, and today I'm going to be reading you the start of this novel, which is the fourth in the Artisan-Sorcerer series. It's available as a paperback or as a digital download. And if you fancy picking up your own copy, I'll leave the details below for you, okay? Here goes. There has been a complaint, said Roger Soames. He leaned back in his PVC office chair and rhythmically tapped a cheap ball pen against the crammed pages of his desk diary. Have a seat, Fabian. Fabian eased himself into the burnt orange club chair in the headmaster's office. He had arrived for this appointment on time, only to be kept waiting outside for 20 minutes. The psychological ploy had failed to unnerve him. What kind of complaint? The headmaster's silver hair glinted with the steely shards of light spearing through gaps in the plastic window blinds. One of your students, Jenny Martell, has accused you of looking down her shirt. Fabian drew in a deep breath. Jenny Martell was a royal pain in the neck, one of a trendy clique who believed they were the hottest honeypots in town. Would that have been on Friday afternoon when I told her to button up her shirt and fasten her school tie properly? She'd undone the shirt so her bra showed. This was during a class tutorial. Everyone was sat around a group of tables while I was handing back graded homework. Soames dropped his pen onto the desk and smoothed the sleeve of his brown woolen jacket. I believe you, but times being what they are, I have to log her complaint and give you an informal warning. You're a good teacher. You've done wonders with the art department, and you've an impeccable track record as an employee. A warning? Fabian frowned. Surely things wouldn't go that far on the word of one student. Soames said, a verbal warning only. It won't go on your work record. Teenagers can be difficult, and Jenny Martell is never going to be nominated for any Student of the Year award. I'm not going to take this any further. Fabian nodded, controlling his annoyance. So, what happens now? Soames didn't meet his gaze. I'm going to assign a classroom assistant to the art department. There's always going to be another adult around. I know it seems OTT, but this school can do without more bad publicity. I feel like I've been found guilty of something I didn't do. Fabian rubbed his palms on his knees. The office felt uncomfortably warm. He focused his mind on maintaining inner calm, checking that his shoulder muscles were relaxed and that his breathing remained even. Soames picked up the pen again and began waggling it between his fingers. He enviously noted Fabian's toned athletic frame and chiselled good looks. Combined with the long ponytail of thick, wavy blonde hair, the neat moustache and goatee beard, and the ice-blue eyes, it was no wonder this 30-something art teacher attracted the attentions of hormone-frenzied teenage pupils. Soames said, it's also a preventative measure to protect you. Roger Soames had done his best to improve this tough city centre high school, but at times it felt like a losing battle. Many of the students treated him like the enemy. To them, he represented the establishment, the system, the oppressor, not just an ordinary man trying to encourage them to work for a better life for themselves. And his hands were tied. There was no effective discipline in schools anymore. The students knew this and ran rings around the increasingly disillusioned staff. He had lost many good teachers to easier jobs with better pay and much less hassle. Soames glanced at his diary. He had an interview with the police in an hour's time. They wanted more information about an assault on one of his staff. The press had already begun hounding him for the story. More bad publicity. His retirement date could not come round soon enough. Yet he felt shame in admitting that, like many others in his profession, he had had enough. He threw the pen down again and looked levelly at Fabian. "You're a good teacher and a valued member of staff, and I'd hate to see your career damaged by malicious gossip. But your lifestyle could be used against you. People get suspicious. These are paranoid times." Fabian was about to reply, but Soames interrupted him. "I know it's nobody's business but yours how you live, but there's been talk. This arts and crafts community you live in, it's attracting curiosity. Some of the staff are uncomfortable. They've heard the students talking. There's gossip about drugs and orgies and strange rites." Fabian sat straighter in the low-slung chair. From the outset, their community had striven to keep their secret activities hidden from public knowledge. Total privacy was vital for them. Fabian carefully kept his reactions under control. "If you want me to take a drugs test, I will. No problem. Right now, if you like." Roger Soames shook his head. "If the governors request that, I'll push for drugs tests for all the staff. I don't want to single anyone out. That only fuels further gossip." Fabian stretched out his long legs and crossed his ankles, deliberately maintaining a relaxed posture. "What can I say? People will believe whatever they choose to believe, though it would be interesting to know how these rumours began." "Forget about it," said Soames, waving one hand dismissively. "People trot out nonsense at times. They watch too many horror films and soap operas, then confuse them with real life. I've been in education for over 40 years and have heard it all before, both from students and from staff. Just watch your back, eh?" "Thanks for the heads up," said Fabian, frowning slightly. "OK, I think that's all we need to say about it." Fabian rose to his feet, recognising that Soames had just called their meeting to a close. They exchanged a few parting words before Fabian left the headmaster's office. He walked past the school's reception desk, aware that the clerical staff were very careful to look busy rather than to meet his eye. He deliberately kept his expression neutral, but he could feel their gazes locked on his back as he strode calmly down the corridor. He determinedly shrugged off irritation. The sounds of colleagues' voices from behind closed doors, reading class registers, calling for homework to be handed in, or insisting the kids settle down to work, could be heard as he headed along the corridor towards the art department. He could hear the uproar even before he walked into the studio. "Quiet! Sit down in your places! Now!" He frowned to add weight to his command, standing his ground in the centre of the chaotic room. A volley of groans and complaints rolled his way as the children loudly scraped their chair legs over the floor, dropped bags and flung themselves into their seats with as much melodrama as possible. "Who is responsible for that?" Fabian pointed to a spider plant which had been knocked over. Its ceramic pot was smashed and trampled soil smeared the surrounding floor. Sir, it was like that when we got here. It wasn't us, sir. We didn't do it, Mr. Masters." There was no point arguing. He could not prove a thing anyway. He wondered where his colleague was, as someone was supposed to have been covering for him while he was with Soames. Couldn't this high school organise even that much? He bit back a sigh and said, "Everyone hand in your homework. Put it in a tidy pile on the desk outside the staff room door and sit down again while I take the register." He walked into the small departmental staff room and slipped his briefcase into a locker. He had only been out of the studio for seconds, but the noise levels were already rising again. There was a hastily written note for him on the desk. The newly assigned classroom assistant was off sick with a cold. Brilliant. Just brilliant. Chapter 2. "How did your meeting with Soames go?" asked Jim. He rested his weight on a tall stool while preparing the community's evening meal. The kitchen was informally divided into two areas, one for dining, the other for cooking. The room felt warm and welcoming. Fabian dropped his briefcase beside the dining chair and began easing his arms out of his jacket. It had been a long day, and he was glad to be home. I got an informal warning for something I didn't do. Seems harsh. Jim smoothed his carefully trimmed beard, which was densely streaked with silver. Tell me about it. Fabian walked round the breakfast bar to the sink and rolled up his shirt sleeves. As he washed his hands, he gazed out at the window at several beds of soft roots and vegetables. Is the boss around? I need a word. Morgan's at the new site, meeting with health and safety officials, said Jim, as he deftly chopped 2 onions. The sleeves of his blue jumper were rolled to the elbows, exposing wiry arms traced with scars from a lifetime of hard labour. He added the onion to a large pan of minced lamb, which was browning on the cooker. Bolognese sound good? Oh, and the garage will collect your car tomorrow. Fabian nodded, drying his hands on a towel. He frowned at the reminder of the vandalism to his car tyres which he had found this morning. It really had been a long day. Cyril's worse, said Jim, reaching for 2 red peppers. Oh? Fabian poured water into the kettle. He was thirsty as well as hungry. The doctor wanted him to go into hospital, but Cyril refused. Nothing can be done, anyway, other than to make him comfortable as possible. Jim kept his gaze firmly on the chopping board. Jim and Cyril had been friends for decades. They'd worked together on trawlers sailing out from Mallaig, and toiled side by side when their remote crofts needed a second pair of strong hands. They had been to each other's weddings, and years later to the funerals of each other's wives. And later still, when advancing age was already creeping up on them, their lives had been changed forever when Bethany Rose had arrived in Knoydart, a wild and ruggedly beautiful, isolated peninsula on the west coast of Scotland. Jim and Cyril had been part of the small business enterprise she had created, and only for her would the 2 men have agreed to leave their beloved homeland. Fabian watched the guarded emotions flit over Jim's lined face. Does Bethany Rose know? Jim nodded, turning away to add the diced red peppers to a pan of sizzling mince and onion. She's with Cyril now. Fabian began making tea for Jim and himself. Do you ever regret leaving Knoydart? Aye, sometimes, said Jim, his Scots accent undiluted, despite the years living in Liverpool. He gently stirred the pan's contents. City life's not for me. I miss the sound of the wind over open spaces. I miss the clean tang of sea air and the feel of raw earth beneath me, the roll and pull of the tides. He looked down at the leg which had been partially amputated many years ago. Ah, enough, I'll be getting sentimental. You must visit Knoydart some day. Fabian opened a drawer to get a teaspoon. I've a standing invitation from Kelvin to visit him there any time. It was an invitation he had no intention of accepting. Jim nodded but said nothing. Kelvin Morley had continued running part of Bethany's business after she had left Knoydart. He offered walking, climbing and canoeing breaks to tourists. He usually visited Morgan's household once or twice a year, which was quite enough for Fabian's liking. Jim set plates to warm on the cooker top. Renovating this old Georgian house and being a part of this community has been a pleasure. Hard work, but enjoyable. But times are changing, like your car tyres being found slashed this morning. That would never have slipped through Cyril's or my attention once. Now we both slept soundly through it. Not that anyone would expect, not in Cyril's condition. Fabian eased himself onto a stool on the opposite side of the breakfast bar to Jim, who was trying to hide his real feelings behind his characteristic dour facade. Jim wagged the wooden spoon as he made his point. Cyril's not the only one who can't do his job anymore. I'm not much younger than he is. Our skills as shamans have protected this community in the past, but he can't do that now, and I'm not far behind. We need new blood, Fabian, and fast. Fabian sipped his tea. Jim was right. In addition to the rumours of drug abuse and ritual magic which Roger Soames had brought to his attention, this now made 2 issues that he needed to raise with Morgan. When the small community took informal places around the kitchen table, Fabian and Bethany Rose served dinner. The mood was sombre. The 6 of them were thinking of Cyril, who was sleeping in his room just across the hall. At least the syringe driver meant his pain could be properly controlled. Bethany carried a bowl of grated Caerphilly cheese to the table. She was a short but curvaceous woman with hip-length glossy black hair. She looked 10 years younger than her mid-40s. Her beauty owed nothing to surgery, but to her daily routines of yoga, meditation and other more secretive practices. "How is Cyril?" asked Caddy, twirling spaghetti round her fork. Her fashionably layered brown hair hung to the shoulders. "I don't know," Cathal replied, a short 1920s bob swinging with a slight shake of her head. It was the twins' differences in hairstyle which enabled casual observers to tell them apart, especially when they were dressed in the identical white tunic and black trouser uniforms of Renaissance, the beauty salon they co-owned. Bethany said, "Cyril's slipping fast. The doctor told us he could go at any time." There was an uncomfortable pause. No one knew quite what to say without resorting to clichés or platitudes. "At least it's been a short illness," said Caddy quietly. "Only a few weeks ago Cyril and I were weeding the strawberry bed in the garden together." Cathal watched Bethany sprinkle cheese onto her bolognese. Cathal's own plate was only half full, and not one flake of cheese would pass her carefully made-up lips. She was determined to preserve her svelte, willowy figure. She turned attention to her twin sister, Caddy, and said, "That's often the way with stomach cancer." Jim scowled, irritated by Cathal's blunt manner. He had no appetite. The food felt unpleasant in his mouth. To change the subject, he looked to Rowan and asked, "How was university today?" "Fine, thanks," Rowan replied. His sandy auburn hair flopped over his pale forehead, and he used one slender hand to brush it away from his winter-green eyes. "I was doing revision, mostly, in prep for the final exams." "Where's Morgan?" asked Caddy, as she reached for a glass of water. "He's still out," Jim said. "He phoned to say he'd be late." He pushed the food around his plate, pretending to eat. "Any problems with the new site?" Fabian dabbed his lips with a napkin. The bolognese was delicious, spicy and juicy, just how he liked it. Jim shrugged. "The boss isn't likely to tell me. I'm just chief cook and bottle washer." "You're much more than that, Jim McAdam, and you know it," said Bethany, with a warm chuckle. "You virtually rebuilt this house." Jim wriggled on his chair. "Ah, nonsense. A few shelves here and there, a bit of DIY. You built this entire kitchen." Bethany refused to accept his understatement. "This place was a wreck when we moved in, and now look at it. You and Cyril did a wonderful job of renovating these old rooms." "You've made a real home for us all," said Rowan, who had grown fond of the dour old Scot. Jim had gone out of his way to help him settle in after Morgan had brought him into the community. "Bah!" mumbled Jim, grinning and looking bashfully at the tabletop. Then he thought of Cyril growing weaker by the hour, and his mood faded back to grey. Frenzied barking erupted from the living room where the dogs had been dozing. Seconds later, the front door opened, and Morgan was greeted by his 2 huge Irish wolfhounds, who were delirious with joy now he'd come home. Morgan made a big fuss of Sage and Onion, who then happily padded after him down the hall and into the kitchen in the hope of further cuddles or food, whichever might be on offer. The 6 people at the table looked expectantly at Morgan. Morgan offered the faintest of smiles. The new site passed all health and safety checks. "Excellent!" Bethany jumped out of a chair and rushed to Morgan, flinging her arms around his neck. He readily returned her embrace, nuzzling his face into the side of her neck. Caddy smiled at their near-legendary love. She glanced at Rowan. He was smiling too, perfectly at ease with the three-way relationship which he, Morgan and Bethany shared. She felt envious, not of them personally, but of their love. She wished that someone would love her that much. Cavell studied her sister's reaction, then looked away, unable to hide her contempt. This was not missed by Fabian. Caddy sat cross-legged on a thick rug in the lounge, plucking at a beautiful antique sopranino mandolin. Firelight from the Georgian sandstone fireplace brought out the warm colours of the instrument's wood. Onion's nose was resting on Caddy's calf. The dog's dark eyes gazed upwards, silently pleading for her attention. Every so often, Caddy stopped plucking a medieval madrigal to gently massage the wolfhound's fluffy grey ears. Each time she did this, Onion's tail thumped happily against a leather armchair. Rowan sat nearby, reading through course notes and checking details in the textbooks which spilled over a low table. There were several such tables in the room, each with a few comfortable chairs sat around them, as if this was a private club or a hotel lounge. One table housed a chessboard, with a game halted in mid-progress. Rowan enjoyed the in-house tournament, even though, as Bethany Rose liked to point out, Morgan always won and Fabian always came second. Rowan had been giving the other contenders some tough competition for a third place, however. "Is my music distracting you?" Caddy looked across the room to Rowan, who was clearly engrossed in his work. She plucked a few bars of another tune as she spoke. Not at all. He didn't raise his head, hoping she would take the hint. "Time flies, don't you think? I mean, Cavell and I opened our salon 3 years ago. That's gone over so quickly." Murmured Rowan, continuing to read. His university's exams began soon. He was determined to do as well as possible. "I can remember the two of us viewing the salon for the first time. Dreary and old-fashioned it was. A real granny's shampoo and set joint. Faded flowery wallpaper and curling photos of dead actresses. But we knew it would be fine once we'd changed everything." Mumbled Rowan again, frowning faintly. He pointedly turned a page of his notes and tapped his pen on the nearest textbook. Caddy strummed a few chords of another medieval madrigal, then said, "It's difficult sometimes, though, with Cavell and I both living and working together. Oh, I know the attic conversion is divided into 2 rooms, and we each have separate sides, but even so, people often think twins want to do everything together. Cavell and I look similar, but we are 2 very different people." Rowan sighed and continued trying to study. "I mean, for example," Caddy said, oblivious to Rowan's deepening frown and the increased tension in his shoulders. "We don't even like the same men. Cavell always goes for sophisticated business types, but I don't. She always expects to get who she wants, but the man I like hardly even notices me." Rowan glanced at her. Her shoulder-length brown hair shook softly as she laughed and then said, "Don't look so worried. I didn't mean you. You're too young, and I know you're all Morgan's. What's it like being his pupil? You know, so many people in our order would give their eye-teeth to be in your position." Rowan sat straighter, paused, and then closed his books. He began stacking them together, as clearly Caddy wasn't going to let him study in peace. This arts and crafts community was also a branch of an international religious order, whose occult practices he had begun to study. Morgan had taught him much, but Rowan was still very much a novice. He simply said, "I love being with Morgan." Caddy watched him stand and gather his things. Hoping to provoke a response, she said, "I think Cavell is a little jealous of you and Bethany." "Why?" He walked a few paces towards the door. Caddy shrugged and played dumb. Oh, I'm probably wrong. She doesn't tell me everything. I don't tell her everything either. Then what exactly is your point? Rowan was irritated by Caddy's chatter. She was the one community member that he struggled to get along with. Caddy smiled and strummed a few more chords. I did tell you she goes for powerful business types, like Morgan. Rowan paused in the doorway. A sharp retort was on the tip of his tongue, but he bit it back, refusing to be drawn into some stupid squabble. He took a deep breath and left the room. He walked down the hall to the stairs, intending to continue studying in his own room. As he passed Cyril's ground floor room, he didn't notice Fabian sitting beside Cyril's bed, holding the elderly man's frail hand while Cyril drifted in and out of consciousness. Fabian, however, had heard every word of their conversation. Well, if you want to find out how Rowan gets on in exams and how Cavell and Caddy get on with their adventures and how Fabian gets on with his adventures, you'll have to read the book. There we are. There it is again. Fabian. 4th in the Artisan-Sorcerer series. And for those who've been asking recently, number 5, which is the final book in the series, is on its way. I'm currently finishing writing it, so you won't have too long to wait for the next one. Remember to click on the subscribe button in the corner down there, and if you liked it, click on the thumbs up sign and leave me a couple of comments below, okay? I'll speak to you soon. Bye. Thanks for watching.